Hello YouTube, Dave here again. So today I want to take a quick look at the spell system in the Pathfinder 2nd edition playtest book. So I just started looking over the spells within the last couple of days, and I'm going to be honest, at first it seemed a little bit overwhelming. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the stuff seems a little overwhelming at first when it comes to this. The way that they chose to do things is sort of interesting to say the least, but I've been getting a little bit more familiar with the way that spells work, and I kind of want to compare how spells function in this to the previous version as well as maybe a more contemporary counterpart. So traditionally with Pathfinder and with previous versions of Dungeons & Dragons like 3rd edition where Pathfinder was derived from, spells would work in such a way that I'm not going to say all of them, but quite a few spells would actually scale and have increased power as the caster progressed in level. Like, for example, with Fireball, it was 1d6 per level. So at 5th level when you got the spell, you rolled 5d6 for damage. When you gained 6 levels of caster and cast Fireball, it did an extra 1d6 and so on and so forth. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, spells don't work along those lines. The easiest way to sort of kind of try to explain it is they modeled them more after the 5th edition spell slot system, in that each spell has its base power that it does, and then there's heightening effects. So for some spells at certain levels they gain their heightened ability, or like certain level spell slots that you have to be able to put them in. Others you can just put them in any spell slot that you want from whatever the base one was and up. So let's just have a quick look here. We'll just get to the spell section. So there's a few spells that I kind of want to show off for the purposes of this video, but just wanted to touch really quickly on those heightened spells like I said before. So if you're a spellcaster who prepares their spell slots, you can heighten spells by simply preparing them in the higher level spell slots. So if you have up to 5th level spell slots and you have, like, say, Fireball, which is the one that they have here, you could cast Fireball as a 3rd level spell if you prepare it in a 3rd level spell slot, which does its base 66 damage. If you memorize it into, like, say, a 4th level spell slot, it deals 8d6, or if you put it into a 5th level spell slot, it does 10d6, and so on and so forth. So, for example, every spell level higher than its standard version that you prepare the spell in increases the damage by 2d6, and that's something that a few different spells have. Another thing that I want to talk about is how, what the actions are for spells and what the action costs for a lot of spells are. But let's go first to one of the classic spells in fantasy role-playing game, if I can find it here. I'm pretty sure it has the same name. So we got Magic Missile. So Magic Missile, it has a casting time of verbal casting or more, it says in here. So it says you send forth a dart of force streaking toward a target that you can see. It automatically hits, deals 1d4 plus 1 force damage. When casting the spell, you can increase the casting increase the casting by a material casting action, a somatic casting action, or both. For each component you add, increase the number of missiles you shoot by 1. You choose the target for each missile individually. And each one of those types of casting that you add actually increases the number of actions. So if you look up, for example, at Magic Fang, you have the casting is somatic casting and verbal casting, so it actually takes 2 actions. There are some spells that do all 3, although very few. There's other ones that, or at least very few of the ones that I've seen so far by looking through. So there's probably a whole bunch of them, but and so each of those types of casting does take one of your 3 actions per turn. So in a combat round, you get 3 actions as well as 1 reaction that you can use between the end of your turn, or between your turn and the start of your next turn. You can use a reaction, and some things, like there are some powers that you can get that have like reactions as their casting type. So some of those you can actually apply onto a spell as well and use basically everything all in one go. But that's, again, a little bit more advanced, and I'm not completely familiar on that yet, so I don't want to go too far into that. But if we look at Magic Missile, so with the heightened +2, it says you shoot one additional missile with each action that you spend. And heightened +2 means that it has to be 2 spell slots higher. So with Magic Missile, you can cast it at 1st level spell slot, 3rd level spell slot, 5th, 7th, or 9th. You can't cast it at like 2nd, 4th, 6th, or 8th, or anything like that. So that's basically how that works. So you can heighten it that way. You also have a spell like Magical Aura, which it's a 1st level spell, and you can heighten it to a 3rd level spell slot, and that's it. The one that I really wanted to show off here, and just because I had a little bit of trouble finding the spell at first, because I was expecting it to be listed under something else. So let me just see if I can get to it here. Alright, so the other spell that I want to look at in this video is Heal, because Heal is one of these interesting spells in which you can increase the casting time like you can with Magic Missile, but it actually changes how the spell functions for each additional type of spell casting that you add to it. So for each additional action that you spend on it, it changes the way that the spell works. So, for example, here we have Heal. So Heal replaces things like Cure Light Wounds or Cure Wounds or things like that that we're sort of used to. Heal was always, in older versions of D&D, was always like a 6th level spell that healed a ton of damage. This version here, and I'm sure there's a greater version of it at some point, but this is the first one that I was able to find. This is a 1st level spell, and its base casting is a somatic casting component, but you can add more to it. So as you can see, it's got like range touch, range 30 feet, or aura 30 foot, and that depends on the number of actions that you spend while casting the spell. So we have here, the description just says you channel positive energy to heal the living or damage the undead. You restore hit points equal to 1d8 plus your casting ability modifier to a willing living target, or deal that amount of damage to an undead target. The number of actions you can spend when casting the spell determines its target's range, area, and other parameters. So if you just do the basic somatic version of the spell, it works like the Cure Light Wounds that we're sort of used to from Dungeons & Dragons, in which it is a range of touch. And if you're using it to damage an undead, you have to make a melee touch attack against the undead target. Now, if you were to, say, decide to spend 2 actions on it, you can do the somatic and verbal casting of the spell. So that takes 2 of your 3 actions. This symbol here stands for an action. So basically, you've got the somatic casting, which is an action, as well as the verbal casting, which costs an action as well. And with that, it says that the spell has a range of 30 feet and doesn't require a touch attack when targeting an undead creature. An undead target must attempt a fortitude save, taking half damage on success. And I'll touch on the other part a little bit later, but I think that's actually kind of cool, is that on a critical success it takes no damage, or on a critical failure it takes double damage. And then finally, if you wanted to, you can do, we'll just zoom in a little bit here, you can do material, somatic, and verbal casting. So as you can see, that's going to cost all 3 of your actions for that round. So you won't be able to do anything else. Like, you wouldn't be able to move, you wouldn't be able to do anything that requires an action, but if you do all 3 of them, then it says you disperse positive energy in a 30-foot aura. This has the same effect as the 2-action version, but it targets all living and undead creatures in the burst and reduces the amount of healing or damage to your spellcasting ability modifier. So you can heighten the spell as well. So when you heighten it, for each level that you heighten the spell, the amount of healing or damage increases by 1d8 or by 2d8 if you're using the 1 or 2 action version to heal the living. And so it just kind of goes on like that. So I think that's actually kind of an interesting way of doing things. It does mean that the spell descriptions can get a little bit more complicated than they have been in the past, but it is an interesting concept, in my opinion, that you can actually do that. So anyway, I just thought I would kind of show that off. And the other thing that I like about the spellcasting system, we'll just zoom back out here, is that a lot of things that allow saving throws have critical success and failure. And I kind of alluded to that when I was reading the description here, but I think that's a system that I actually really, really kind of like. It's something that I know that a lot of DMs have kind of joked about in the past. Like if someone makes a tries to like charm person, for example, or they use the command spell and the person rolls a natural one. There's always kind of been that joke that, you know, they like, for example, with command, I had someone do the command grovel spell, and yeah, I rolled a 1 on the saving throw, so I just kind of made the joke that, you know, he actually drops to his knees and just starts apologizing for every bad thing that he's ever done throughout his entire life. And what's interesting is that, like, that was always a joke, and I always, you know, just kind of took it as a joke. But after seeing this, it actually kind of makes sense. It's a way of rewarding you for rolling that natural 20, or, you know, unfortunately punishing you for rolling the natural 1. Most things that have critical success or failure at their damage dealing spells, at least, which are the ones that I've looked at so far, it is typically what we had for the heal spell, in which if you succeed on the saving throw, it's usually like half damage sort of thing. And if you fail it, you take the full amount. But if you get a critical success, which would be a natural 20, then you can ignore all the effects of the spell. But if you roll a natural 1, which is a critical failure, you typically take double damage. So it's an interesting mechanic. I don't know how well it will actually play when it comes to game time, for example, because it could be one of those things where, you know, I mean, rolling a natural 1 sucks, but if you're rolling a natural 1 on a spell saving throw and you end up basically getting knocked unconscious because of one bad roll where you wouldn't normally, it might be a little bit unfair feeling, but I still think it's sort of an interesting mechanic. Most of the spellcasting classes, like the barbarian, not the barbarian, I think it's like the bard, cleric, druid, and wizard. Wow, I'm way off here today. I got my coffee next to me. I guess I just haven't had enough of it. They also have the ability to gain what are called 10th level spell slots. And so when they do that, it's a 20th level class feat that they have to take that gives it to them. So not necessarily every 20th level caster that you come across is going to have it. But if you take it, you get like a 10th level spell slot with 10th level spells. So let's just go back to the magic section here. And let's just have a quick look at some of those spell lists, for example. And the 10th level spells, for example, are very, there's like usually only like 3 that they list. So for example, for Arcane, if you spend the thing to get a 10th level spell slot, you can choose 2 of the 3 spells, Gate, Time Stop, or Wish. And with the divine spells, you've got Avatar, Gate, or Miracle. The occult spell ones, which I think is kind of what the bards use, you've got actually 4 to choose from. You have Alter Reality, Fabricate Truth, Gate, or Time Stop. And Primal has Nature Incarnate, Primal Herd, or Primal Phenomenon. So it's something that it's kind of interesting because, again, you know, these are the most powerful spells in the game, but the only way to get them is to take a class feat at 20th level that grants you access. Otherwise, you're not going to get them. So there's also other stuff that you can take for that 20th level feat as well. So anyway, I just thought I'd kind of mention that as well. The last thing that I want to talk about, I mentioned the heightened spells before and how that works. It works. That's how it works with the classes that prepare their spells, like the wizard, cleric, druid, and so on. If you're a spontaneous caster, similar to like I think the bard spontaneous and the sorcerer spontaneous spellcaster for sure, the way that works, unfortunately, is quite a bit different. So in order to have a heightened spell, you actually have to take that spell again as a higher level spell. So using Fireball as that example, if you took Fireball as one of your sorcerer spells at 5th level when you gain your 3rd level spell slot, so if you took it for your 3rd level spell slot, and then you decided that you wanted to have you know, a heightened version of it, and you know, you decide that for one of your 5th level spells, you want to be able to cast that heightened Fireball as a 5th level spell. The only way you're going to do that is if one of the spells that you take is Fireball for a 5th level spell slot. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I think you have the ability to sort of like retrain or drop previous spells, so you may be able to swap out the earlier version of Fireball for another one. But at the same time, it's like for the spontaneous spellcasters, I have mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, it kind of sucks for them because they have to sort of double or even triple up on some of their spells to get, you know, the heightened abilities out of it, whereas a wizard can simply just say, I'm going to use one of my 5th level spell slots to memorize Fireball into, and not have to have a 5th level version of Fireball scribed into a spell book. So on the one hand, I think that kind of sucks. On the other hand, though, I kind of like the fact that it puts sort of a bit of a limit on the sorcerer to begin with. And there are things that the sorcerer can take to be able to heighten certain spells. For like they can choose, I think, one that they can automatically heighten however they want, I believe, or based off of the heightened abilities of the individual spell. And but it does make it so that the wizard actually has an advantage over the sorcerer. And I know that, you know, the argument's always been made that, well, they have access to more spells than a sorcerer does, but I remember in 3rd edition that sorcerer, at least in all of the games that I ran, sorcerer became the arcane caster. Like, very few people actually took the wizard because, yeah, you have more spells to choose from, but you have to prepare them and prepare the number of each spell that you want to be able to cast. So if you wanted to have, you know, Magic Missile twice, you would have to use Magic Missile in 2 spell slots. Whereas as a sorcerer, you knew less spells, but you could cast them in however order that you wanted. So if you had like Magic Missile, Mage Armor, and Shield, for example, as your 1st level spells, you could just cast all 3 as Magic Missile. You could cast 1 as Mage Armor and 2 as Magic Missile. You could cast, you know, Shield. You could cast Mage Armor and Magic Missile once. Or you could just say, you know, not use Magic Missile at all and maybe cast Mage Armor on yourself or on an ally. And just, so the Sorcerer was always more flexible. And even though the Wizard had more stuff to choose from, the Sorcerer always sort of had the advantage in that, you know, they didn't have to commit themselves to this specific number of spells for each level. So having them need to memorize or learn a higher version of a lower level spell in order to be able to heighten it is, I think, sort of a trade-off there. So, like I said, part of me is a little bit hesitant about it because, again, it does feel kind of limiting. But at the same time, having seen the, I don't want to say damage, but having seen firsthand how many people would choose Sorcerer over Wizard before, makes me kind of like this a little bit better, because Sorcerers have that spontaneous flexibility, but they don't have the ability to just make more powerful versions of their spells sort of at, not at will, but, you know, without having to limit their pool of spells even further by taking multiple versions of the same one. So anyway, just a quick video on the spellcasting system thus far. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think, and if you've played any spellcasters in the Pathfinder playtest, let me know that as well. If I made any mistakes, please let me know that as well, because I'm learning this as I go kind of thing. So I just thought I would sort of put out how I understand the abilities, and we can certainly go from there. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and tomorrow I'm hoping to actually do a character creation on camera. So that being said, I think I might actually make a cleric and do a little bit of that spellcasting stuff and see how that works. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time. Take care.